So some thoughts there from Albertans on perceptions of double standards on issues of divorce, domestic abuse. Amy, what's your take on what you heard from Albertans? Do you think that's an accurate sample of sort of the thoughts out there?
I think there were some good points made. I would certainly agree that violence against men as victims, is underreported. And I'm thinking of a 2005 Statistics Canada survey on victimization, where among men who met the criteria for having experienced spousal violence, only 17% said they reported it to the police. So there's clearly a lot of unreported violence going on. The parallel figure for women was 35%. So the majority of women who are victimized also don't report.
Right.
At the same time, however, without diminishing the experiences of male victims, the evidence from every source that we have, from police, from self-report, from hospitals, from courts, suggests that still women are the overwhelming majority of victims of spousal violence. Even with the low reporting numbers, 83% of reported domestic violence cases involve a female victim.
And the numbers are always very difficult. Sometimes they're difficult to juggle. In this case, they certainly appear to be. I just want to bring out a couple numbers that appear to be contradictory anyway on the surface. We've got Stats Canada. These are both from Stats Canada. They say the percentage of men and women that are abused is about equal. Around 6 or 7%. There's about a % difference. But then we've got this board here. So this is the percentage of victims who were female. This is reported. Incidents in 2007, overwhelmingly women reporting the cases. I mean, Grant, how do you reconcile those differences in stats? How does our viewer at home look at those numbers and understand them?
Well, domestic violence, it must be understood, domestic violence has been studied to death, to excuse the pun. There are journals devoted exclusively to domestic violence, several of them. Martin Fiebert, a sociologist in California, has constructed an annotated bibliography of 200 surveys that have been done all over the world, mostly developed Western countries. And they all show that it's roughly equal, the same as the Statistics Canada survey that you were mentioning. That's a huge survey. That's 26,000 people, Canadians, that they survey. It's very representative of the population.
I'd have to jump in, though, and say with my own familiarity.
If I could just a sec, Nick, we'll just hear from Amy, then we'll go to you.
From my own familiarity with the survey, is it equal, is it not? It all depends on what you're looking at when you answer the question. If you ask people, as that survey did, within the last 5 years, has this happened to you? You get roughly equal numbers of men and women saying yes. If you ask how many incidents occurred, what was the severity of the incidents, what was the severity of any injuries sustained, you get a different picture where women report more incidents of violence in the time period.
And more fear for their life afterwards, and stalking comes into it.
Higher levels of injuries. Yeah, so I think it's a bit disingenuous to say that the levels are equal. In one sense, if you look at one number, they are. Going a little deeper, there's clearly a disproportion. Okay,
Nick, what's your take on sort of the discrepancy of numbers we sometimes see when we're looking at this?
Well, I think it's very important to remember at the more serious end, if we look at homicide, if we look at hospitalization, if we look at fear for one's life, women are by far the most frequent and more serious victims. On the other hand, it is fair to say that if we look at less serious kinds of violence, pushing and shoving, which is certainly distressing maybe distressing the partners and certainly to their children if they witness it, there may be a rough equality there. And so there are cases in which there is mutual abuse, and it's necessary to recognize what we're looking at. If we're looking at the more serious cases, though, as I say, particularly where there's post-separation violence, that kind of stalking behavior, it's almost always perpetrated by men. If we look at on the tragedies of post-separation homicide, it's almost always men killing their former partners, and in a disturbing number of cases, their children as well.
Okay. I want to read a note now. This is from Val Campbell. She is the director of the Alberta Relationship Threat Assessment and Management Initiative. If we can just bring this up, folks, she says Stats Canada reported in 2008 that females continue to be the most likely victims of police-reported spousal violence accounting for 83% of victims. I think you were alluding to this, Amy, compared to 17% males. This holds true for every province and territory across Canada. And she goes on to say, little is to be achieved by individuals taking an adversarial stance on issues concerning domestic violence. When this is allowed, the resulting effect takes away precious time and resources from the already overwhelming task to reduce, prevent, and appropriately respond to family violence. So, Grant, this idea of degree certainly comes in when people are looking at this. I mean, Nick and Amy referring to it, how badly someone is abused, whether or not we should be diverting resources from what is perhaps in some eyes clearly the bigger problem. I'm just wondering, how does degree play into it for you?
Well, it's certainly true that women bear the majority of the injuries from domestic violence and are the majority victims of murders. But on the other hand, you have to realize that very few, percentage-wise, of violent relationships get to the level of requiring hospitalization or murder. There's only about 80 domestic murders in Canada per year, which is about 2 per million, which is pretty small. I mean, that's about as statistically small as you can possibly get.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's true that 3/4 of the murders of partners who are murdered are women, but there's so few of them that if you're going to attack that issue, you're missing the big picture.
Okay. Yeah, Amy?
I think it's
go
important.
Ahead,
It's not just homicide. It's also, if you look at hospitalization, where we have thousands of hospitalizations, the vast majority of them are women. But I do think that that Grant has an important point, and that is that there needs to be individualized assessment of cases. And so to say to a man who has been abused by his partner, well, most of the victims are women, is not fair to him or to their children. And so there needs to be better training to deal with each individual case on its own merits.
Okay. Yeah, last quick word, Amy. Yeah.
I would say that the big picture is that women are more likely than men to be the victims of violence. There's no bigger picture than that. However, I want to agree, I think, with both Grant and Nick and say that acknowledging that there is this gender difference in no way takes away from the suffering of an individual man who is the victim. So I don't see, I guess I'm not really sure what there is to be gained by arguing back and forth in terms of who is more violent when it comes to, because the facts to me speak for themselves, when it comes to what is therefore to be done about it, I'd have to strongly agree with the quote that you read from Val Campbell, that the dynamics, what's going on in individual relationships with individuals, has to be what guides a social and a legal response.
Okay, great discussion, important discussion, folks. I certainly appreciate your time this evening. Grant Brown, former family lawyer, Dr. Amy KALER from the Department of Sociology at the University of Alberta, and from Kingston, Ontario tonight, Nick BALA, a professor of law at Queen's University. Thank you very much.